The alarm blared, echoing through the training hall like a metallic heartbeat. 1 minute, the instructor shouted. Alien cadets scrambled in all directions, grabbing shield panels, dragging benches, ripping fixtures from the walls. In the middle of the chaos, Reed Mercer didn't move. He simply observed. 30 seconds later, while the others wrestled over a single broken chair leg, Reed had transformed the environment into an improvised armory: tripwires, sharpened tools, weighted slings, barricades. Everything. The instructor blinked. What? How? The evaluation drone rose from the floor, scanning, recalculating, glitching. Reed shrugged. You said defend myself. I'm just being efficient. The drone twitched violently, unable to predict the battlefield Reed had built. And aliens across the room whispered, humans are terrifying. 2 weeks earlier, Reed Mercer had stepped off the interspecies shuttle onto the grounds of the Helion Cross-Species Defense Academy, carrying a regulation-issued duffel and a quiet determination to avoid any interplanetary incidents. It was supposed to be a clean start, a chance to blend in. He'd read the files, learned the protocols, memorized the species norms, or at least the non-offensive gestures and phrases. Don't show your teeth around a Varan. Don't touch a Treeland's shoulder nodes. Don't mention food near a Yixorian unless you were ready to share your entire biological breakdown. Simple stuff. Mostly. What he hadn't expected was the staring. Every corridor, every common room, even the mess hall conversation stopped when he walked in. Not rudely. More like people were recalculating. Like they were trying to remember if humans were supposed to be friendly or terrifying. He was the only human in his intake class, maybe the only one at the academy this cycle. Rumors followed him like static. I heard they evolved to throw things really far. They can smell water, through walls. No, it's their eyes. They track motion faster than an Ixori bloodhawk. Reed tried to keep his head down. He knew how humans were seen in galactic circles. Unpredictable, primitive adaptive, exceptionally hard to model in tactical sims. There was a whole section in the Academy's Xenobehavioral Studies curriculum dedicated to Homo sapiens instinct and improvisation, combat evolution in a post-industrial apex species. Catchy title. Still, Reed hadn't come to be studied. He came to serve, quietly, if possible. So far, the most dangerous thing he'd done was survive a Trillian roommate who listened to fluid metal opera at 3 a.m. Until now. Welcome to combat adaptability, Instructor Kesh had said that morning, voice crackling through a translator modulator embedded in her upper thorax. She was a Diraxian tall, chitin-plated, 4 arms, no nonsense. This is not a weapons class. It is not a tactics class. This is about improvisation under pressure. That means no issued gear, no simulations, no warnings. Cadets had exchanged nervous glances. Instructor Kesh turned toward a wide blast door that slid open to reveal a nondescript chamber. High walls, exposed piping, uneven floor plating, a single bench bolted to the side, a handful of structural panels stacked near one corner, and overhead, embedded lights flickered with deliberate instability. It's just a room, muttered a Serati cadet. For now, Kesh said. When the alarm sounds, you'll have 1 minute to prepare. Use anything you can. After that, the evaluation drone activates. It will not hold back. Begin. The door slammed shut. Reed stood near the center, eyes scanning, not moving. Around him, the chaos began. To his left, a Yixorian cadet lunged for a panel, one of the few loose pieces not bolted down. A Trillian tried to rip the bench from its mounts. 2 Varan grappled over a dangling light fixture. A Tovaxi was pulling a pipe from the ceiling with both feet planted against the wall, hissing through its gills. It was a contest of instincts. Everyone else was focused on grabbing something, anything that could be wielded, blocked with, or thrown. Reed wasn't. He was already breaking the room into parts. Support joints, weak welds, loose flooring, electrical conduits. He saw anchor points and fault lines, airflows and shadows. His brain, trained in thousands of quiet hours in dusty backyards and cluttered garages, was assembling a blueprint, not of attack of options. He dropped to one knee next to a structural chair and jammed his elbow down hard. The old alloy groaned and bent. A twist, a pivot under his boot, and it snapped in 2. Reed pocketed the screws and tossed the cushion aside. Next, the pipe. Instead of yanking it free, he braced it under the bench's base plate, wedged one end against the wall, and stamped. The bend folded clean. One end was jagged, the other, weighted. He slung it across his shoulder and moved on. Electrical wiring dangled from a half-broken light fixture overhead. He gripped it, pulled carefully, and wrapped it around his forearm like a rope. The insulation frayed in his hands, but it held. That would work. Next came the broken panel, one side sheared at an angle. He scraped it along the wall, sharpening the edge further, then stuck it through the hole in the bench leg, like a blade into a handle. Sling, insulation tubing, weighted with a handful of screws wrapped in cloth torn from his uniform's inner lining. Shield wall, 3 stacked storage crates with a chair leg driven through to anchor them. Tripwire, repurposed wiring strung across the hallway junction, just loose enough to be invisible, just high enough to catch a rolling drone. And he wasn't done. A chunk of broken floor panel was leaned at an angle to distort heat signatures. A polished screw placed at eye level to reflect motion and light. An upturned crate filled with metal shards to simulate a trap. All in under 30 seconds. By the time the rest of the cadets had finished shoving and grabbing, Reed was standing still again, hands at his sides. The room was no longer just a training chamber. It was a battleground designed, not decorated. And the aliens around him were no longer scrambling. They were staring. The alarm clicked off. Instructor Kesh's voice returned. Time's up. Evaluation. Drone activating. A circular panel hissed open in the far wall. From within, a spherical drone floated out matte black, unmarked, with 3 rotating visual sensors. It hovered silently, its outer shell humming with internal processing. It scanned the room. And paused. Instructor Kesh narrowed her eyes. The drone twitched. A soft whirring sound grew louder as its threat analysis algorithms kicked in. The drone turned toward the Yixorian cadet, holding a panel. Then toward the Tovaxi. Then, it froze. The drone's sensors blinked in rapid succession. It turned a few degrees to the left, then immediately corrected. Its altitude dropped by several centimeters, then surged again. It hovered near Reed but didn't approach. Instead, it performed a full 360-degree rotation and backed off. Instructor Kesh's translator flickered. What? The drone zipped left. And tripped. The tripwire Reed had strung was nearly invisible, but it caught one of the drone's lower stabilizers. The machine jolted sideways, steadied, then spun twice trying to recalibrate. More scanning. More confusion. Its vision lensed in on the polished screw, reflecting motion from a dangling wire, and recoiled. It hesitated near the crates, flagged the heat-distorting panel as a power leak, and avoided the sling trap entirely by default. By the time it tried to re-engage, it looped toward the ceiling, descended sharply, and parked itself in the far corner, twitching. Kesh looked down at her wrist pad. The readouts were unreadable. Predictive failure, target model corruption, sensor feedback loop. The drone wasn't malfunctioning, it was panicking. Reed looked around, suddenly uncertain. Was that part of the test? No one answered. One of the Serati cadets, the one who'd tried to snap off a light fixture and ended up with a mild electrical shock, took a slow step back. She stared at Reed, then whispered, "Humans. Manufacture danger." Instructor Kesh didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she tapped her wrist pad. End simulation. Alarms cut out. Lights returned to standard brightness. 2 security technicians entered the room almost immediately, both eyeing the drone like it had grown a mouth. "Take it for analysis," Kesh said. "Something's interfering with its behavioral logic." Reed raised a hand. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything to it," she interrupted. "That's the problem." One of the Varan cadets stepped closer to the wall. From a distance, Reed frowned. He was just trying to follow instructions. But the way everyone was looking at him, like he'd just upended their entire idea of what a combat test even was, made something else clear. He wasn't just a new cadet anymore. He was a case study. And somewhere deep inside the Academy's archives, someone was already opening the file, labeled, Human Environmental Threat Adaptation. Reed sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. So much for blending in. The hallway outside the training chamber felt quieter than it should have. Not physically, there were at least 20 cadets walking with him, their footsteps tapping or squishing or clicking depending on the species. But none of them were talking. Especially not to Reed Mercer. He didn't blame them. If he'd watched a peer turn a storage room into a pressure-triggered death trap, with nothing but a few screws and a bad attitude, he might also keep his distance. A Trilon cadet 3 paces ahead glanced back at him, then whispered something to her companion. The other cadet, a thick-shouldered Kirek, let out a low grunt and immediately moved to the far wall. Reed was pretty sure he heard the words weapon and reckless, though, with the translator lag, it could have also been wet eggs and rectangle. Both were possible in Kirek culture, apparently. He kept walking. When he reached the hallway junction that led to his dorm sector, a familiar voice called out, "Mercer, hold up." Instructor Kesh. Voice flat, expression unreadable, though with a Diraxian, that could mean anything between "I'm proud of you" and "I'm about to eject you into space." Reed stopped. "Yes, Instructor?" She motioned toward a side corridor. "Evaluation debrief. Now." No room to argue. They walked in silence for 30 meters, turned twice, passed through a biometric gate, and stepped into a dim-lit observation suite lined with holoscreens and drone telemetry panels. Waiting inside were 3 figures: an engineer, a neural behaviorist, and someone wearing a uniform Reed hadn't seen before. The uniform wasn't military. It was regulation, sure, but the seams were sharper, the emblem was classified tier, and the person wearing it had the kind of neutral gaze that suggested multiple security clearances and 0 patience. Kesh gestured. "Cadet Reed Mercer. Improvisation test subject." The man in the unfamiliar uniform didn't rise. He just looked Reed over once and said, "He's shorter than I expected." Reed blinked. "Sorry?" "No need to respond. Sit." He did. The engineer spoke first. "Let's start simple. Did you touch the drone?" "No." "Did you use any electromagnetic sources or frequency disruptors?" "No." "Did you interface with its sensors, ports, signal grid, or calibration band?" "No, I didn't even go near it." The engineer exchanged a look with the neural behaviorist. Kesh crossed her arms. "Then explain how your setup caused a level 4 predictive cascade failure." Reed hesitated. "A what?" The neural behaviorist leaned forward. The drone panicked. It failed its environment parsing loop. It started treating the room as hostile territory with no clear vectors. That doesn't happen. The program isn't designed to interpret input that way. "I didn't do anything to the program." "No," said the man in the sharp uniform. "You didn't. That's what's so problematic." He stood and activated a nearby holoscreen. Footage played of the drone entering the room. Reed's improvised obstacles glinted in low light. The moment the drone detected Reed's barricades, its sensor pulses doubled, then tripled. The red warning flags lit up across its pathfinding logic. "This drone has adaptive heuristics," the man said. "It adjusts based on real-time threat indicators. When faced with something it doesn't understand, it models probabilities and executes countermeasures." Reed nodded slowly. "So, it didn't know what I'd built. It didn't know how to categorize what you built. It didn't fit any model." Kesh added, "It scanned your tripwire and assumed it was a sensor disruption. It marked your heat-deflecting panel as a potential power vent. It flagged your sharpened chair leg as industrial debris. It couldn't decide what was a trap, what was camouflage, and what was misdirection, so it marked the entire area as a dynamic zone and shut down aggressive routines." Reed rubbed his temple. "I just used the room." "That's the part no one's figured out," the engineer said. "You use the environment not to create weapons but to manipulate perception. Were you trying to confuse the drone?" "No, I was trying to protect myself. You said to defend. I used what I had." Kesh narrowed her eyes. "Then how do you explain this?" She switched the display to another angle thermal overlay. The heat signatures of the cadets blazed across the screen, but Reed's position was muted, blurred, obscured by angled surfaces and spacing irregularities. "You built a thermal dead zone," the engineer said. "Were you aware of that?" "I mean, I angled a crate wall. That might have disrupted airflow." "And the reflective screw?" the neural behaviorist asked. "Was that placed to scramble motion tracking?" Reed shrugged. "I noticed the light kept hitting that wall. I thought I could use the reflection to trick the drone's targeting. You said it would be live. I figured any delay might help." Kesh took a long breath. "So you didn't plan to break the test?" "No, I was just improvising." The man in the sharp uniform turned off the screen. He looked at the others, then back to Reed. "Congratulations, cadet. You've been classified as a behavioral outlier." Effective immediately, your test data is restricted to security review, and you are barred from future adaptability drills without senior supervision. Reed blinked. Wait, you're punishing me? No, we're acknowledging risk. You demonstrated a capacity to bypass combat evaluation systems without violating a single protocol. That puts you in a category we have very few regulations for. The neural behaviorist added, You didn't cheat. You exposed a flaw in the way we train. Reed leaned back, trying to absorb it. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just doing what made sense. That, the man said, is what makes it so dangerous. By the next morning, everyone knew. Reed didn't know how the story got out, whether it leaked from the observation room or just traveled fast through cadet networks, but by breakfast, the cafeteria had a perimeter. Not an official one. Just a quiet 10-foot radius that no one crossed, unless absolutely necessary. Even his roommate Jalen, a tall, lanky Trilan with overgrown cranial fins, paused at their shared table before sitting. You built a kill zone in 30 seconds? Reed sighed. I built a defensive setup. With a tripwire that sent a drone into therapy. It didn't go into therapy. That thing was muttering coordinates when they carried it out. Reed pushed his tray forward. Do you want my starch cube or not? Jalen accepted it but didn't take his eyes off him. They're calling you a specialist now. Environmental weaponization. That's a whole designation. Most cadets don't even get classified until third term. I didn't ask for that. No one thinks you did. That's why it's worse. Across the cafeteria, a Serati cadet whispered something to her table. 3 others looked directly at Reed, then looked away just as fast. Reed rested his chin in one hand. Remind me why I came here again? Because Earth joined the Accord 5 years ago, and now they send people like you to remind us all that humans never evolved a safety filter. I had a safety filter. I avoided the sharp pipe. Jalen grinned. Yeah, real restraint. But Reed wasn't smiling. He hadn't come to cause a stir. He wanted to prove he could contribute to learn alongside others, not become some myth whispered about in training halls. The academy was supposed to be about unity, about trust between species. Yet, here he was surrounded by peers who looked at him like a predator on casual mode. Maybe that's what bothered him most, not that they were afraid. That they didn't understand why he wasn't. Later that week, Reed was summoned again, this time to the Academy's Central Research Wing. The room was filled with holograms of cadet stats, species behavioral maps, and simulation models. In the center stood an elder Tovaxi researcher with a slow gait and careful eyes. Reed Mercer, the Tovaxi said, extending a gill-frilled hand. I'm Dr. Velchara. I study instinctual adaptation across species. I've reviewed your simulation data 20 times. Reed accepted the handshake. I wasn't trying to make a new branch of science. No, but you gave us something rare. You demonstrated real-time pattern recognition that doesn't follow logical progression. Your actions appear chaotic to observers, but they serve a functional, predictive purpose. Reed hesitated. Back home, we just call it common sense. Then common sense is something our models can't process. Dr. Chara circled a projection showing the drone's final sensor readouts. Data spiraled across the screen, variables spinning, collapsing, rebuilding. Do you know what this is? Sensor panic? Close. It's a system encountering a pattern it was never trained to recognize. Not randomness, not unpredictability. Something worse, behavior driven by instinct, layered over improvisation. It couldn't tell if you were planning or reacting. Reed nodded slowly. That's kind of the point. Exactly. And we have no defense against it. Not yet. Reed exhaled. So what now? Dr. Chara smiled gently. Now, we study you. Not to fear you, but to understand. Your instincts might change how the next generation of multi-species operatives train. Reed wasn't sure how to feel about that. He hadn't come to be a model, or a myth, or a threat. But, maybe, just maybe, he could be something else. A reason for the Academy to look at humans not with caution, but curiosity. Even if it started with fear. Reed stood alone in the Academy's training archives, surrounded by generations of recorded simulations, performance logs, and evaluation models. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the data towers lining the walls, each pulsing with amber light. It was quiet enough to think finally. He'd asked for this, not out loud, but through channels. Ever since his impromptu demolition derby of the evaluation drone, the Academy had pivoted from caution to fascination. Reed had been pulled into over a dozen post-scenario reviews, interviewed by 4 departments, and subjected to 2 neurological scans. He'd asked for one simple thing in return: access. And now, here he was, granted observer clearance to the training archives. He didn't want to prove a point. He wanted to see what the rest of the galaxy thought adaptation looked like. After 3 hours of watching alien cadets approach drills with impressive but rigid technique, Reed began to see the pattern. Every simulation followed one of 6 core models: structured combat, reactive positioning, multi-threat evasion, single-point defense, assisted retreat, or predictive disruption. Even when cadets improvised, they did so within known parameters. The variables changed, the logic didn't. He paused a recording of a Serati cadet's combat drill and rewound it 5 seconds. The cadet had hesitated before crossing an exposed section of flooring perfectly natural. But she waited until her companion confirmed line of sight. She'd relied on confirmation. Reed wouldn't have. Not out of recklessness, out of experience. The gap didn't need a partner's clearance. It needed a single test object, a bounce, a toss, a sound echo. Humans made those decisions without discussing them, sometimes without even thinking about them. Maybe that was the point. Trying to reverse engineer yourself? Reed turned. Instructor Kesh stood near the doorway, arms behind her back. Her tone was neutral, but her mandibles, no, wait, not mandibles. Her facial plates. Reed corrected himself. Either way, she wasn't hostile, just observant. Not really, he said, trying to understand what I broke. Kesh stepped beside him, glancing at the frozen frame. You didn't break anything. You reminded us what we forgot. And what's that? That not every threat follows patterns. Some emerge, some mutate, and some don't know they're threats until the situation forces them to be. Reed watched her carefully. You think I'm a threat. I think you're a variable, one we failed to simulate. She tilted her head toward the screen. Your species has only been part of the Accord for 5 years. Our models are built on centuries of known species behavior. We never coded for human reflex loops because they don't follow formal escalation logic. You shift strategy mid-action. You prioritize utility over structure. You don't just adapt, you remake the space. Reed scratched the back of his neck. Where I'm from, no one comes to help unless you make a reason for them to. That leaves a mark, I guess. Kesh nodded once. The command review board wants you reassigned. He blinked. Reassigned? From what? From standard cadet rotation. They want you in systems vulnerability. Reed took a moment to process that. Because I outsmarted a drone? Because you revealed something none of us predicted, that your species treats the environment itself as part of the threat surface, and none of our AI models account for that. She handed him a datapad. The header read, Proposal, Interspecies Environmental Response Training, Draft Human Protocols. Reed scrolled. The proposal outlined an entirely new training directive, inspired by his test: environmental weaponization, real-time adaptive construction, non-standard spatial manipulation. At the bottom, a footnote caught his eye. Human cadets may be excluded from standard improvisation simulations to prevent cognitive contamination of baseline data sets. Reed frowned. They're separating me. Kesh didn't argue. They're protecting the model. He looked up. I'm not trying to mess up your simulations. I just didn't want to die to a training drone. That, she said, is why the board doesn't know what to do with you. You didn't try to win. You tried to survive, and in doing so, you broke the rules without breaking any rules. She paused, then added, That's not sabotage, that's evolution. Reed didn't answer. He just stared at the paused frame of the Serati cadet, frozen mid-decision. Later that week, the Academy scheduled a second test. Quietly. No announcement, no public evaluation. Just a new drill room, a handful of cadets from mixed species, and Reed Mercer standing again in the center of a square room that felt suspiciously simple. This time, the room was clean. Polished floors, even lighting, no crates, no wiring, just 30 feet of open space, 4 embedded cameras, and a single large door across from them. Instructor, Kesh, stood to the side. This is a closed-loop scenario. No tools, no materials, no disassembly permitted. Just you, your surroundings, and the drone. You'll be evaluated on evasion and prediction only. Reed nodded once. Got it. A soft beep sounded. 30 seconds. Reed rotated slowly in place, noting the airflow vents, ceiling joints, even the spacing between wall panels. He wasn't looking for weapons this time. He was looking for inconsistencies. 10 seconds to go. He shifted slightly to the left. Then again, 2 steps forward. A corner of the ceiling panel vibrated minor, almost imperceptible. A resonance lag. That meant hollow overhead space. The drone door opened. This one was larger than before. Combat grade. Reinforced casing. The moment it entered, Reed sprinted not away, but toward the far wall, where the ceiling panel was weakest. The drone tracked him instantly. Projected path. Intercept within 3 seconds. Reed jumped not high, but fast, grabbing the low edge of the side panel. It shifted under his weight. He slammed it again. On the third hit, it cracked. The drone rotated to account for the unexpected vertical positioning, but its onboard logic had no recorded behaviors for terrain modification during movement. Reed dropped flat as the drone fired a pulse. The cracked panel above him collapsed. Reed rolled beneath it as it landed directly into the drone's flight path. Impact. The drone's forward momentum shattered the panel and destabilized its hover. It corrected, sloppy, uncertain. Reed didn't attack. He just ran 3 sharp angles around the room, stepping once near the base of each vent. 3 moves later, the drone hesitated. Its sensors began treating the vented airflows as unstable terrain, flagging the entire southern quadrant as low visibility. The drone backed into the far corner. Kesh stepped forward. Pause scenario. The drone halted. Reed stood in the center again, breathing steady. You didn't build anything, Kesh said. I didn't need to. I just gave it decisions it wasn't programmed to make. She exhaled slowly. You do understand that this is why the board's nervous. They shouldn't be nervous, Reed said. They should be curious. He looked at the ceiling. Everything can be a system, even the blank walls. That night, Reed sat in the dormitory gardens alone. It was one of the only places on campus where no one avoided him. Or maybe just the place where no one showed up. Jalen eventually found him there, holding 2 nutrient drinks and wearing his usual half-exhausted expression. You made another drone short-circuit, didn't you? Reed took the drink. I didn't touch it this time. Yeah, that's what makes it worse. They sat in silence for a minute. Then Jalen asked, Do you want them to be afraid of you? Reed shook his head. I want them to stop acting like being different means being dangerous. Well, Jalen said, you did make a drone mark a ceiling tile as a hostile entity. Reed chuckled. Okay, that one was funny. Jalen leaned back on his elbows, fins twitching in thought. They're going to change the whole curriculum because of you, you know. I know. And they're never going to let humans take a standard test again. Reed looked up at the stars. Probably not. Jalen raised his drink. To environmental weaponization specialists. Reed clinked it. To making the galaxy mildly nervous. By the time the Academy's quarterly evaluation summit began, Reed Mercer's name had already made its way into 3 training syllabi, 2 ethics memos, and 1 classified interspecies tactical report. He hadn't meant to start a curriculum war. All he'd done was pay attention. But apparently, when a human did that in front of surveillance drones, instructors, and 14 species of cadets, it turned into a policy discussion. The summit itself wasn't designed for cadets. It was usually a formality department heads trading updates, program directors reviewing species, adaptation stats, someone from legal trying to retire early without triggering a scandal. This time, they invited Reed to attend. Not as a cadet. As a test case. He sat near the back of the main forum, flanked by 2 quiet observers from the research wing. On the main display, a holographic projection looped drone footage from his most recent assessment. The one with no tools, no sabotage, just positioning and pressure. Observe the subject's movement, said a training coordinator, gesturing to the footage. He identifies structural inconsistencies, not as weaknesses to exploit, but as tools for controlling enemy perception. No direct interference, no aggressive posture, just recalibration. The footage showed Reed stepping across the panel junctions, luring the drone into heat exhaust zones, then standing perfectly still while its sensors recalibrated. A Varen colonel leaned forward. Are we absolutely sure the cadet isn't using neural disruption? He's been scanned 5 times, said Dr. Chara, seated beside the ethics director. No enhancement, no augment. This is baseline human instinct under stress. Another officer tapped his notes. So he sees what we don't? He acts before our models know what to see, Chera said. And he does it because humans, unlike most galactic species, evolved in threat-rich environments, where sensory input was constantly misleading. Pattern recognition wasn't optional, it was survival. The room fell quiet. At the back, Reed shifted in his chair. He hated watching himself in playback. It always made his movements look deliberate, like he'd walked into the room with a master plan. But the truth never felt like that. It was never about cleverness. It was just about noticing what others didn't, and not assuming everything had to be done by the book. Recommendation? Asked the summit chair. Dr. Chara spoke clearly. Codify the behavior. Create a training pathway for environmental pattern response. Assign human cadets to help design it. With supervision? There was some hesitation, but no real resistance. The proposal passed. Reed had just been turned into a department. That evening, he returned to the training yard, now unofficially nicknamed Mercer Hall, by half the cadet wing, much to his horror. The original evaluation chamber had been retrofitted, not as a monument, but as a test bed. Every object inside had been scanned, cataloged, and tagged with the results of Reed's impact. There were signs posted now. Do not stack crates. Vent airflow is monitored. Sharp objects may trigger alerts. He sat against the far wall, next to the floor tile he'd once pried loose with nothing but his boot and some optimism. Jalen entered a few minutes later, tossing him a hydration capsule. Your fan club's getting big. Not a fan club. They're writing thesis papers about you, man. The Xenobehavior Board used your tripwire as a case study for nonlinear threat modeling. Reed took a long drink. I didn't even mean for it to be a threat. It was just in the way. Yeah, that's what makes it a threat to them. They sat quietly for a while. Above them, the lights dimmed, slightly simulated dusk. On Earth, this would have been the time for warm wind, maybe a few insects, and the creaking sound of someone's screen door that hadn't been fixed in 20 years. Reed missed it more than he expected. Do you think they'll ever stop treating me like an anomaly? He asked. Jalen tilted his head. No, but not because they're afraid. Then what? Because anomalies are how systems grow. You showed them something they didn't account for. Doesn't mean you're better, just different, in the right way, at the right time. Reed nodded slowly. That's fair. Over the next week, Reed was assigned to a provisional unit tasked with stress testing new training protocols. His job wasn't to lead or instruct, it was to disrupt. The Academy wanted to see how their current methods held up under environmental manipulation, which meant Reed spent his days intentionally making things inconvenient. He rewired corridors to simulate power faults, tilted floor panels to alter momentum, adjusted light levels during motion drills to test visual tracking. He wasn't breaking anything. He was introducing friction, and the results were clear. Cadets improved not by memorizing new moves, but by learning how to read a room differently, how to look for the story a space was telling, not just what the opponent was doing. One Varen cadet, after narrowly avoiding a decoy pitfall trap disguised as a cleaning bot path, approached Reed with an expression that translated to cautious admiration. I get it now, she said. It's not that you're trying to win, it's that you're trying to make the space fight for you. Reed grinned. Exactly. And for the first time since he'd arrived, he felt like someone understood. The final drill of the cycle was voluntary. An integrated simulation, 6 cadets, unknown environment, rotating threats, no fixed strategy. Reed almost didn't sign up. He wasn't interested in proving anything. But Jalen nudged him. Come on, one last test. Do it with a team. So he did. The chamber was wide, unfamiliar, filled with low barriers, flickering lights, variable gravity pulses, and temperature shifts every 15 seconds. The other cadets fanned out immediately, trying to track the threats. But Reed didn't move. Not yet. He closed his eyes. Listen to the hum of the vents, the uneven pulse of the floor, the rhythm of pressure changes. When he opened them, he wasn't thinking about tools or weapons or angles. He was thinking about balance. Then he moved, guiding his team, not by command, but by redirection. He knocked a panel loose to reveal a shortcut, used a shifting temperature patch to mask a teammate's location, directed motion by scattering debris. By the end of the simulation, the drones had failed to tag any cadet with a direct hit. It wasn't a perfect run, but it was efficient. Afterward, one of the alien cadets approached him. "I don't understand how you made us all better," she said. "You didn't tell anyone what to do." Reed smiled. "I didn't need to. I just made sure the space was ready for what we needed it to be." She stared at him. "Do all humans think like this?" "Some. Others are better at making coffee under pressure." She looked confused, but laughed anyway. At graduation, Reed didn't get a medal. He didn't give a speech. He wasn't even listed in the top honors. But his name appeared in one place at the base of a new module in the Academy's adaptive curriculum. Mercer Protocols, Environmental Analysis, and Improvised Threat Navigation. Not for glory. Not even for recognition. Just as a reminder that sometimes survival isn't about power or precision, it's about paying attention. And no species had ever paid attention to chaos quite like humanity. As Reed packed his duffel to leave the dorms for good, Jalen stood in the doorway, watching him carefully. "You know they're going to write books about you. I hope they spell my name right. They'll probably name a drone subroutine after you, something like Mercer Subvariant 9A. That sounds horrible." Jalen laughed. "Then you'll fit right in. Welcome to the galaxy." Reed zipped his bag, slung it over one shoulder, and paused just long enough to look back at the room that had been his for a strange, unexpected chapter of his life. He hadn't come here to be unpredictable. But maybe that was the point.